Hello, and thank you for taking the time to watch this video on blended learning. My name's Todd Crane, and I teach at Bergen County Academies in Hackensack, New Jersey. I'm a chemistry teacher as well as teaching the theory of knowledge to our IB diploma students, and I've been a lead teacher on campus for the past several years. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I want to talk about some of the trends that were happening in education and technology prior to the coronavirus, and then ready or not, here came the coronavirus, and now we're all at home doing virtual teaching and learning. So I think in many ways, coronavirus has served to be a catalyst for some of the changes that I think were already in place to come in the space of education and educational technology. And so hopefully, through the course of this video, I'll convince you that these changes are essentially necessary, and I'll try to give you some tools and practices you can put in place right now, as well as help you plan for the fall of 2020. So prior to the coronavirus hitting us all in late February, really early March, it turns out that students were already engaging in lots of online learning. About a third of all college students took an online course. The role of virtual learning, online learning, has been an important feature in the corporate world for quite some time now. There are already 5 states in the U.S. that require high school students to do an online course as part of a graduation requirement. And the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is if we think about different parts of the marketplace, it turns out that the good enough and convenient has a tendency to beat out the inefficient and best. For example, let's think about music. It wasn't that long ago that services like Napster and then eventually iTunes really completely changed the music industry and the way that we purchase and listen to music. And so while it can be argued that things like MP3 files and those kinds of digital files may not be the best source of music in terms of quality, the thing is you cannot beat the convenience of being able to download or nowadays stream your entire music collection right from your smartphone. And so there's an example of something that may not be the best version of what it is, but it's good enough and it's incredibly convenient. And so it's pushing aside things like, maybe high quality CDs or even things like vinyl. So the good enough and the convenient is going to beat out the best and inefficient. And so I think we're going to start to see that really happen in education. I'm not going to argue that blended learning is the best way to do education, although I think it has lots of advantages. I do think, though, it's incredibly convenient when done well, and it's more than good enough. And in some cases, it actually might be better than what we can do in the classroom by itself. So, ready or not, right, the coronavirus hit us all. New Jersey schools closed on March 18th. Last time I looked, there are 46 states that have decided to close their schools for the rest of the school year. And of course, colleges and universities also closed in early March, which I think is kind of interesting when you think about it. The students at Harvard and Princeton with their $50,000 a year tuition are getting pretty much the same experience as students who are attending colleges that have been doing online learning for a lot longer. So for example, Southern New Hampshire University, they've had a vibrant online portion of their curriculum delivery for several years, and the tuition there is less than $10,000. And so whether you're a SNHU student or a Harvard student, you're getting pretty much the same experience now. In fact, I'd actually argue that the SNHU system is in place to do it much better than whatever sort of last-minute changes places like Harvard and Princeton tried to cobble together in order to finish their school year. Now think about this as well. Imagine if the coronavirus had hit us, say, 5 or 6 years ago. I think it's safe to say that most school systems would not be in a place to roll out things like virtual learning. I think we'd be looking at delaying the school year and hoping that we could bring the kids back in, maybe late May or early June and pick up the school year and head into the summer months still in school. Now, that obviously would have been a radical change to the school calendar. So that the coronavirus hit us in 2020, we're kind of in the beginning of a sweet spot for educational technology. We're actually able to roll out virtual learning. And so I think it's important to think about the future. What will school look like in the fall of 2020, right? The coronavirus is not going to be going away anytime soon, and there are still going to be potential hotspots cropping up, and so some schools may have to shut down again. And even if they don't have to shut down, the fact that we're going to have to be involved in, physical distancing and whatnot could alter the way a school is structured. So I think it's really important to think about how you can incorporate technology into what will become the new normal for schools in the near future. So I think ultimately that the coronavirus has caused us to accelerate the changes in terms of adopting technology that were kind of already in the offing as we move forward. So, ignoring technology as part of teaching, it's no longer an option for schools and for individual teachers. And in fact, if you ask me, I think that professional development in the area of educational technology should be a district's number one priority for PD for the foreseeable future. Of course, there are a lot of other PD requirements and opportunities, and they all have value. And so I don't want to minimize those, but I think we really do need to bias our PD towards developing the skills and the comfort level in order to deliver ongoing education in a virtual space, should we require it, and also just to incorporate it into our new normal routine for schooling. This goes for teachers and, of course, administrators. Administrators are going to have to be evaluating teachers who are using these virtual environments, and they're going to want to stay on top of the latest, most effective ways to leverage technology for their schools just in general. And, if I were an administrator, the ability of a teacher to use educational technology would certainly inform my tenure decisions, and they absolutely would inform my new hire decisions. And I think it's also important that however you want to think about it, there are more choices for schools at the K through 12 level for most families in this country. Set aside any political conversation you might want to have about charter schools. School choice is getting broader and broader. And so I think the school that is able to show to families, look, if something like the coronavirus or anything like that happens, we can continue delivering a quality education to the students. I think something like that's going to be important as families think about their options going into the future. Now, what we're doing right now, I don't think is best described as blended learning. We've kind of been shoved into a remote learning setup. There's really no part where students consume content virtually and then come back to campus and get a chance to do hands-on activities based on that virtual experience as a follow-up. So this really isn't blended learning we're doing right now in New Jersey and across the United States. It's really remote learning. Some of it is asynchronous, where a teacher might prepare a video lesson and push it out through YouTube, and some of it is synchronous, right? Zoom is all the rage these days, and so there are teachers K through 12 that are incorporating Zoom into their daily instruction. And so what I hope to be able to do as we get into the rest of the video is I want to show you some of the tools and techniques that I use and I've developed over the years that allow me to incorporate technology into my teaching and create a little bit of a blended learning experience for my students. And I also, again, I think it's really important to think about how you can leverage technology moving forward. We're all sort of in a triage moment of getting through coronavirus, but we need to start thinking about the fall of 2020. How can we set set up our classrooms so that we can give a good quality education to the students, regardless of what's happening on in the world around us. So some of the tools that I use in my own blended learning classrooms, the learning management system we have on our campus is Schoology. Of course, many school systems or individual teachers might be using something like Google Classroom. About 10 years ago, I went from being more or less a PC guy to being a Mac guy, and a lot of that had to do with the second generation iPad. Once that device came out, I began to start to realize some of the possibilities that tablet computing could give to somebody like me, a chemistry teacher. And so I tend to do most of the creating of my content on a MacBook Air and my iPad Pro. In fact, this video that I'm recording right now is being done on my iPad Pro, and I'm going to turn over to my MacBook later on in the video as I do a little bit of mirroring of my iPad and show you some of the tools I use there. On my Mac, I use things like QuickTime to do screen capture, screencasting of the desktop. Camtasia allows you to do screencasting and a little bit of editing as well. An application called Reflector 3 allows me to take the desktop, as it were, of my iPad and project it onto my computer desktop so I could video capture it there. But I think one of the most important tools that I use has actually been Explain Everything. Of course, a lot of teachers now are using Zoom, and I'll talk a little bit about Zoom later. But an app called Explain Everything, and nowadays the name is Explain Everything EDU. They have a enterprise-level version of the software that you can get on a subscription basis. But I think for most individual teachers, the EDU version is plenty good enough. And again, in fact, that's actually the application I'm using right now to do this recording. And then there's another iPad app called GoodNotes, and right now I think they're in the number 5 version of the release. I use GoodNotes a lot when I'm Zooming with the students because it turns my iPad into a very convenient whiteboard that I can share through Zoom. And I also use GoodNotes a lot for my own note keeping, and it's become a very helpful tool to keep myself organized as I prepare, blended lessons or any kind of school activity. Some other tools that I think are really important for a teacher to be able to blend their classroom content effectively. You're going to make some videos, and you need to be able to push that content out somehow. And so having a YouTube account is really important. Using an external microphone, I'm actually using one here right now. This is it's called the Blue Yeti. It's a nice quality, fairly inexpensive as they go external microphone, but hopefully it gives me a better sound quality. The Apple Pencil, when the iPad Pro came out, use of the Apple Pencil I think really expanded the capabilities of the iPad, not only as a personal productivity tool, but also as a teaching tool. And one of the things people don't tell you about when you get into technology is there's going to be all sorts of cords and adapters and dongles you're going to need to negotiate to connect the iPad to the computer and the computer to the microphone, et cetera, et cetera. So there are different sorts of adapters that you're going to have to get used to having at your disposal when you want to do things like produce videos. All right, so that's going to close down the commentary portion of this video, and I'm going to switch over to my desktop in a little bit and start to show you some of the things I do on my actual iPad to produce some of my content. Okay, so here we are. We're on my iPad. And I'm actually using the screencasting feature or the screen capture feature that's embedded in one of the more recent updates for iOS. You can see on the screen there the little red dot with a circle around it indicates that I'm actually recording my screen. And I'm also recording the audio using that Blue Yeti mic that I mentioned before. I'll try to go ahead and include a picture of the setup that is going on my desk right now for a little bit of reference. So what I want to talk about here on the iPad are a couple of the apps that I use quite a bit when I'm creating content for my classes, when I'm organizing myself for my classes. And one of these apps, GoodNotes, I'll get into second. In addition to being a teaching tool, that's actually a tool I'm using quite a bit to try to push myself in sort of a paperless direction in terms of my own work production. But the first thing I'm going to start with is the application Explain Everything edu. So I'm going to go ahead and tap on that and fill that up to the screen. And you can see here some of the more recent Explain Everything videos that I've put together, including the video that I did earlier in this video for the presentation. So I'll go ahead and click on that and open that up. And you can see a little bit of the behind the scenes nuts and bolts to what I did here in Explain Everything. And I can slide through the slides. You saw me doing this in the video earlier. And you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a toolbar. You can see at the top, you can see the functions for recording and doing any little small bits of editing. So why don't I go ahead and close this out without saving the changes, and let's pretend like we're going to start a new project. So I'm going to go ahead and click on New, that big plus sign, and it gives me some options. I could start with a blank canvas. I could pick some different templates, and they have all sorts of fun little templates there, but I'm just going to go ahead and start off with a blank canvas. All right, so on the right-hand side, again, we have the toolbar. I'm going to go ahead and pick this icon that looks like it has a little target symbol in it, because that brings up a little pointer, as you can see here. So on the right-hand side, we have all of the different tools that we might use during the creation of a video lesson. Up the top here, that's the record button, and then we have some of the information associated with the file name for the project. And it usually defaults to a file name like whiteboard until I save it as something a little bit more specific. All right, so here we have an Add Files option that I'll get to in a little bit. This is the sort of cursor mode where I can go ahead and grab materials that eventually I put into this white space here. That is the pen icon. There's a highlighter, an eraser, a fill with color kind of tool, a shapes tool, a typing tool, and then the big X here is a delete tool. I'm using the laser pointer, and as you can see, there are different sorts of laser pointer options, including some fun lightsaber options down towards the bottom. And then we have, this is an information icon that I'm going to use in a little bit when I start to bring in some files, because it allows us to set parameters for some of the file content that I could bring in. And then we have a back button. This is a function that allows me to change the way the toolbar is displayed and things like that. But that gives you the basic layout of the different tools that you have available in Explain Everything. And eventually we're going to use this white space as an area where I'm going to create my content. So the first thing you might do when you are creating in Explain Everything, kind of like what I did with the first half of the presentation, is you might have some slides. So I had some PowerPoint slides that I turned into a PDF, and then I imported those PDF files into Explain Everything. And that's where we're going to use this Add File tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and you can see it gives us different options. I'm going to click on File. I'm going to click on Files because I have some stuff there, and you can see some of the more recent materials that I've brought in. For example, I could bring in this periodic table, and it asks me exactly how I want to bring it in. I'll go ahead and click on Insert, and voila, I have a beautiful periodic table there on the center of my stage. And you can see that the hand icon on the toolbar on the right is defaulted and selected. So I could, with my finger, grab that and move that all around. I could twist and turn it and do all sorts of things. But let's say I want to keep this as straight as possible. I'm going to hit the back button here to recenter it. This is where this icon with the little eye in the middle. I click on that and it brings up some options, like the lock option. So I'm going to click on the object here, and I'm going to click on lock rotation. So then when I come back here and I move this around, I can't rotate it around and make it crooked. So this way, things could stay nice and straight for me as I go ahead and work with this content. So let's go ahead and pick the pen bar. I'm going to go ahead and pick blue for my pen icon, and I'm going to pick sort of a moderate sized pen color size. And you've got all sorts of different color options. So maybe I'm doing a lesson on the periodic table, and I do something like circle this portion of the periodic table and talk to the kids about how that would be the halogens. And maybe I could pick a different color and talk about how this portion of the periodic table would be the nonmetals. So you could see how I could begin to use this white space to develop a lesson. And when I go ahead and click on the icon up the top here, this icon up here, that's going to start the recording, and it'll start to record the audio, and it'll also record any movements I make on the whiteboard space. Let me go ahead and shrink that down and get that out of my way for now. Okay, you noticed that I had my face in the video earlier, and the way I did that was by doing the insert the new information button, and I clicked on video. And this is only it's shooting straight up to my ceiling here because I have my iPad on the desk, but you can see that it brought in the front-facing camera, so I'm able to actually show my face as I go ahead and make one of these video productions. All right, that's enough of the ceiling in my office. All right, so that gives you some of the lay of the land that you can do with Explain Everything. I got to be really honest here. This is the single most important tool I have in my toolbox when it comes to creating content in the form of videos that I want to push out to my students. If I'm doing a flipped classroom, blended learning style environment, I want to be able to push the content out to the kids. And I think virtually every single lesson video I've ever made has been made using Explain Everything. Let me talk quickly about another tool that I use quite a bit, and that is GoodNotes. GoodNotes is essentially a digital notebook application, and there are many others out there. Some of the other common ones that you might see are Notability, but I really like GoodNotes because, well, I'm sort of used to it by now, and I think it has a really nice marking up tool. So one of the things I use GoodNotes for is keeping myself organized, but I can also use this to actually teach my classes. For example, I have here a file for AP Chemistry. I could go here to the AP Chemistry lab folder. Here it is. And you can see here what I did is I brought in a PDF of a recent lab worksheet that the students were working on, and I went ahead and I filled in the answers for myself. Now, this is a little bit hard to demonstrate without the additional equipment available, but one thing I can do, if you know how to do a mirroring option in iOS, is I can mirror my iPad to something like a projector that might have an Apple TV, and I can actually teach using this GoodNotes as my whiteboard. And there are options like this little option right there that I just highlighted that gives me a laser pointer, and I can go ahead and point to different parts of the document. This is also really helpful. I can zoom in so that students can see portions of the screen a little bit better. But in terms of blended learning that's going on maybe right now, probably the biggest thing I use GoodNotes for is I actually couple it with Zoom when I'm doing some live office hours or some live instruction. And I pair it with Zoom so that through Zoom I'm giving myself a digital whiteboard, and I'll show that to you a little bit later. So that gives you an idea as to some of the things that I like to do right off of my iPad for content creation. Again, the two big tools are Explain Everything, that's how I make my videos, and GoodNotes, that's how I can mark up PDFs, and it's also how I can interact with the students using a whiteboard space in something like Zoom, which I'll show you in a little bit. All right, so that's all for this portion of the video. Let's head off to Zoom now. Okay, so here's a little bit about how I use that application on my iPad, GoodNotes, when I'm doing a Zoom session with my students so that I can have essentially a digital whiteboard while I interact with the kids on Zoom. So here I've already got my Zoom account queued up on my laptop, and behind it I have started a Zoom session. So let me click on the window behind it. Hello there. So sometimes when you're doing a Zoom session, you want to go ahead and share your screen. When you click on that, one of the options you can see here is an option for iPhone, iPad via AirPlay. I'm going to go ahead and click that option. Go ahead and click share. It's going to give me a dialog box, and then it's eventually going to tell me to go ahead and share with my local Wi-Fi. And so I'll go ahead and do that, and now I am up and running here on my iPad. And here now I have the application GoodNotes that I was showing you before, available now through the Zoom session. And I can go ahead and select the pen tool, select a color, and now I can start to go ahead and do some chemistry explanations of maybe a particular kind of combustion reaction that the kids were having a little bit of trouble with. One of the really neat things about the functionality of GoodNotes is you can see right now at the top, you can see the toolbar functions that are showing up. Well, I can actually hide that from the students by selecting on the icon on the top left with the arrow coming out of the box, and I can select Mirror Presenter Page. And when I do that, that toolbar portion goes away so that the only thing the students would see would be the portion of the white space that I'm using as my whiteboard. So that's just another way that I like to use GoodNotes with the students now that we're doing some Zoom sessions with them during our virtual learning. All right, so that's enough of the iPad and Zoom and the desktop. Let's finish up with a few final comments. All right, so that'll do it for the video. I hope I've done a reasonably good job of convincing you that blended learning is going to be an important toolbox in any teacher's kit of teaching tools as we go forward. I think that the experience we have now with the coronavirus has only accelerated the need to be able to transition to using appropriate educational technologies to deliver our content. So now start thinking about what you might be able to do for the fall of 2020, right? This school year is going to be ending in a couple of more weeks. You'll have the summer to start to plan, and I think you really should be thinking forward about what you can do with blended learning and incorporating some of these technology pieces into your regular teaching. The first bit of advice I would have for you on that is think about a unit or a portion of your units that you think would really lend themselves well to a blended learning environment so that you yourself can be successful, the students can find some success in that format, and then you can kind of take it from there, right? There's going to be a learning curve to this, no doubt. You're going to make some mistakes. You're going to have your share of successes and failures, but really once you get used to using some of these tools, it really does open up the possibilities that you have for interacting with your students. All right, thank you for watching. Stay safe, enjoy the summer, and take care, everybody.